This novel is fictional and there are no similarities. And reality, don't worry about it, is also not permissible. Relying on it as a historical or scientific reference, check. From any other reference, and experience anything mentioned therein may. It is dangerous and the perpetrator is responsible. Name Ahmed Bakr. I hear you saying that you know this now as the author of the novel. You would like to know who will accompany you as a witness to the events and the truth. Me too. They considered it to be a similarity of names between the character of the novel and the narrator, or the names of the same person. In fact, or that the author took his character's name as a pseudonym, or that the character. The novel borrowed the author's name perhaps, but in reality there is no difference to me, I hope. Is there no difference to you? I am a fictional character and no one has invented me. So I decided to write about myself, and I believe that I am the person most capable of talking about myself. Do you think it is essentially a novel? All of these are legitimate questions, however. The easy answers are not the best ones. Choose what suits you and create your own beliefs. At your sole risk. As for age, when this story happened I was 15 years old. My life, and I think this is my hope now. At this point in my life I was living in an area where I had been for 8 years. For the first 10 years of my life the neighborhood was called Al Basatin, an area located between Mahdi, Dar es Salaam, and several other areas, and at this time he was there. Many quiet places and slums were called orchards by this name, due to its former nature as it was called in the Mamluk era, Al Basatin Sultan, which is a huge area of agricultural land. It produces all types of vegetables and fruits. Over time the name orchards was dropped, Sultan, and the name was changed to Al Basatin only. One of the most famous commercial streets in Al Basatin is Mehran Street, which was located in Can I live on a side street from it. The distance between my house and the cemeteries is very far. But who said that ghosts care about distances? At this stage I experienced many paradoxes and worthy stories. To tell you, of course not all of them happened to me, but I was exposed to some of them and mixed up with them. Those who were exposed to it and the earth excavated many stories that happened there. In turn I will tell it to you. My story this time is about a terrible type of evil that we may deny not for nothing. Its appearance, or because we are not close to it even a little, we deny it out of our intense fear. Among them in the past our grandmothers were afraid to mention the Sultan's illness and speak ill of him. The monster or malignant disease is as if the mere mention of it might summon it, and so did Rowling in the Harry Potter novels when she made everyone nickname Voldemort, whose name must not be mentioned. It is the power of the word and the power of the name. It is the power of fear which creates holes in us that bring harm, and each hole depends. The evil that our conversation calls for is something we fear, so we don't like to talk about it. Evil is only a passing imagination that cannot exist. This time we are talking about magic, specifically black magic, evil forces, and demons. Is there such a thing as black magic? It is easy to deny what we do not know. Denial is a mental comfort if you think, for example, that we live on a ball stuck in the sky rotating at crazy speed in a forest of balls. Flaming rocks and giant rocks. The idea is annoying if you contemplate it, so it is best to ignore it. I do not blame anyone who denies hidden powers, and I advise him not to listen to them at all. Otherwise he will realize how extremely naive and optimistic he was. Tuesday, February 21, 1905. Night fell over a forest in West Africa, and the leaves were reflected. The broad moonlight of the small trees mixed the pale color of the night, the bright green color of the trees. It was cold, but the trees were thick. The wind has calmed down, but you can smell the deafening scent of grass with cold breezes. Some unknown birds began to squawk from time to time. It is as if they were telling each other something and talking back to each other. In the middle of the unsafe bush, unusually, there was a large hut. Wood and wicker, and it seemed like there was something going on inside. He imposed his prestige on the place, and the forests were devoid of any sound except his voice. Regular chirping of birds. Inside the hut there was an English man, 30 years old, dressed in full aristocratic clothing and a wool coat. The luxurious Englishman wore a small hat, and he had a thick mustache that almost hid his mouth. His beard is light but has long whiskers, which gives him the appearance of being older than his real age. In contrast, there was a Negro man with him whose clothes only covered him. His pelvic area and the rest of his body were naked. Not only were they hanging around his limbs, but some of them were penetrating his skin. From his ears and lips to his navel. His body was like a shiny granite statue, muscular but thin. On the sides of the hut you can glimpse, for rays of light, smoke as if there was a stove underneath them. Subtleties, they almost form bodies from one case to another. They resemble humans in appearance other than the back of the head looking like the curled horns of an antler, or we can call them devils. The Negro man had a large copper pot boiling in front of him with firewood underneath it. The Nova contained an oily infusion from which sticky bubbles were scattered. On one side of a worn wooden table were several plates containing various things. If we were to distinguish some of them, traces of some crushed bones could be seen. However, some of the small dead organisms are also treated by crushing. Leather wing remains could point to bats. The Negro man began adding powders to the boiling pot and stirring it with a faded, broken tree branch. He started reading out loud some African words that can be translated as follows. To the genie, the prince of the jinn-s magicians, and the bearer of the book, Merit, I summon you. In your name, relief, in the time of solar rays when the sun permits you to do what you need, I grant you the incarnation you desire to dominate the human world. And you will be my servant in my service, and through you will bring people to my doorstep. And with you my neck rises above the necks, and take whatever blood I have collected for you, and give me glory until the day of great annihilation. Here the man went to one of the ropes tied to the top of the side of the hut, and untied it to move another smaller vessel from above to start the fresh blood. It pours slowly onto the copper vessel sitting on the burning firewood, from which a thread of smoke begins to emerge, as if the blood was poured onto the thread of smoke, as if it were falling on something solid, giving it a human form, as if it were hidden and revealed by the incarnation resisting the spilled blood. I participated in the glow. The four shadows on the sides of the room almost faded from color. White to the color of fiery combustion, the Englishman stepped back. He sat on one of the wooden benches and shrank, his dignity disappearing as he watched. That terrible incarnation. The figure that came out of the pot began to take shape as a human from the spilled blood. Starting with a beating heart surrounded by veins, arteries, and a skeleton of bones. The gray hair contains slowly growing masses of muscle tissue. Then the class started. The skin covers this formation, and an ugly face begins to draw its features. A face that tends to be reddish with thick folds around the eyebrows and thick hair. A pointed nose embedded in a face that tends to lengthen like an inverted triangle that ends, with a chin decorated with some gray hairs. The Negro man smiled, revealing his yellow rotten teeth. So he made his black rooms, and the copper vessel split and its contents spilled onto the ground. The hut had a clay floor, so the fire was extinguished on the wood and the ground was wet. The liquid spilled out, and then the man appeared standing on the log. It was formed from blood and smoke, and its age can be estimated if we consider it to be a human. He was 50 years old, and he looked at what was around him with great pride. Then he looked at his hands. He turns them over in front of his eyes, then feels his face and grabs his long hair. Its color is bright charcoal, and close to its pointed nose it smells of life. The Negro brought a hooded cloak that was hanging on one side. He threw it on the body of the naked creature, and the creature that took the form of a human enveloped it, to cover his white body, which was saturated with red. The Negro rose to his feet and said, he points to his feet, now prostrate yourself at the feet of your new master and owe me allegiance and obedience. The being called Yaghoth extended his hand, which appeared to have sharp nails, towards the man's neck. The Negro touched his neck, causing a wound from which abundant blood flowed. From him, the Negro man stepped back, holding his neck to stem the flow of blood. While he was dazed from shock and pain, while Yaghealth said, "Yagath is a master and has no master except the peacock of the devils, the master of us all." Then he pointed to him, and the four spectra rushed towards his body, which staggered on the ground, struggling with his last moments. The upright spectra seemed to bend like the shape of wolves from the fog. She began licking the oozing blood, while the man muttered words that sounded like a curse he was casting on the invitee. Yagath, the features on his face shivered as if the words had an effect on him that he did not realize at the time. Then he turned to the Englishman, who was still curled up in his chair, covering his face with his hands, preparing for death, and said to him, "And who is mortal?" The man rose up and prostrated before him, kissing his feet and saying, "I am your servant, and in your hands I am the weak caller to your worship, Crawley. I came here to witness your incarnation and declare my complete loyalty to you and to the peacock of demons." He motioned for him to get up, and he got up in anticipation, his neck throbbing with terror. So he shook Yaghealth. He nodded in an expression of acceptance, saying, "It pleases me how helpful you are." Then he motioned for everyone to leave the hut, and the four spectra evaporated without a trace, leaving the Negro's corpse lying on the ground, trembling in its final state and drenched in blood. What was around him? And when he and Crawley came out of the hut, he turned to him and pointed. With his hands, the flames ignited around the hut, consuming it and everything in it, to reach the grass around him. Then Yaghealth moved away, and behind him was Crawley. He glanced at the burning hut, swallowed his saliva, and lowered his head, walking behind his new master.